And welcome to WY20. I'm your host, Carl Figueiredo, and today we're joined with Stafford Mathews. He's an indie props master, and we're going to learn a lot about what it means to work in the indie world and be a props master. But I've had the pleasure of working with him many a times. He worked on the infamous indie feature film Golden Delicious, and I'm sure we're going to hear a lot about that and his little... How do I put this? The highs and lows of working on a film like that with a budget such as Golden Delicious. But first and foremost, Stafford, I want to ask you, what does it mean to you and how do you operate as a props master? What is a props master, essentially?
Sure. I mean, I kind of think of it as I'm responsible for managing, sourcing, kind of, et cetera, those things which the actors are interacting with, touching, holding, eating, kind of a whatever action it is in the scene. With the line kind of being things like, I'm not responsible for the chair they're sitting in. That would be another department. So larger objects or pieces of the set fall to the set department, set design department. But then, anything that's like weapons are obviously something that's like really common. Food is really common, but even bags, occasionally like jewelry, watches, that sort of thing. Like it's a pretty wide array. And a lot of it honestly comes down to like project to project too. Very often, a part of, I think, my responsibility more than anything else is to communicate with the set tech department, the set decorator, and say, which parts of this are you going to handle? With costumes department, which parts of this are you going to handle? Even makeup sometimes. I've had to kind of work with, okay, where do you want to set that line of what you're going to do and what I'm going to do? Because there is so much crossover.
So one thing that you mentioned there with the crossover that like just popped into my head, where does and this might just be the communication, where does the line get drawn if, let's say, a blood quib, someone gets shot, blood comes off of them, it hits their face, it hits a prop. Do you decide what type of blood hits that prop? And is it sometimes different to the type of blood that's meant to hit their face?
In a situation like that, I mean, it kind of comes down to, first and foremost, the rule is always actor safety. So it's my responsibility to facilitate that. So certainly there are blood that is easier to clean off of a prop, and I would love if my life were easy every day. But the fundamental rule is that if it's going to come down to an actor allergy or what is going to be comfortable and safe for the actor, and the makeup department is going to say this is what we're doing, or the special effects department is going to say this is what we're doing for those reasons, then it's on me to say, okay, great, well then my prop is going to be ruined every take, and I better have 10 more of them in the truck.
Nice.
So yeah, it is a big. I really have also come to really appreciate like the safety role that I play because I do manage. And again, even if I'm not necessarily like, oftentimes there's armorers or other personnel involved in the actual like doing of these tasks, prop makers, etc. I find that it is really important for me to kind of act as like the safety person advising the ADs, right? Yourself, because you're focused on bigger picture things and your expertise is in a different area. I found in my experience that kind of I treat myself and I treat, in my interactions with ADs as kind of an expert opinion for you to then make your final decision, but it's often based on kind of my decision making.
And so. I think that's a big part, especially in the indie world, because I always view it as like, I hope that every head of department is at a certain standard. And if they can bring their own elements to the table, such as like the safety for their own department, because I can't know everything, or like the AD can't know everything, the producer can't know everything. So you expect that head of department to know the rules of their own department. And speaking of the safety of your department, weapon safety. So what is the difference between, where is an armorer needed? Let's say we're talking about guns for a sec. Where's an armorer needed, and where is it acceptable to have a props master with, I guess, a weapons license? Could you speak a little bit about guns, gun safety,
yes,
gun violence.
safety. So there's and I'm sure, God forbid somebody's watching who knows more than me and calls me on it. But no, it comes down to like I'm originally from Alaska, so like firearms have been around me, and I've been sort of trained in safe handle of firearms by hunting culture pretty much my whole life, and for that I'm very thankful. But obviously in a professional setting and in a film setting, the rules are very different.
Yeah.
So within Canada, of course, to handle firearms, you have to have a license, and there's a whole lot of the RCMP sets their standards and their rules for all those things. Unfortunately, to kind of their credit, their focus is on real firearms that can do real damage.
Yeah.
So their rules are a little bit vague around fake firearms, prop firearms, non-firing, dummy guns, these sorts of things. Their rules are just unfortunately a little bit more vague, and I know that the industry in Canada has, as kind of a reaction to that, set rules internally to maintain safety. Couple things that are less, that are a lot more, I should say, like less unclear from the RCMP. Any live ammunition is a federal crime to bring to any set in Canada for any reason. That's whether or not that set has firearms on it. If you forget that you took a hunting trip and you bring your backpack with a couple spare bullets, you've technically just committed a federal crime, and it's pretty serious. It's taken very seriously. I've not ever had the experience of having somebody do that personally. I don't think anybody wants to call the RCMP because their key grip forgot a bullet in their bag. But there is, that would kind of turn into a situation where if I found out about this, I would probably just go to that person and say, I've got a safe on my truck and we're going to lock it up.
Yeah.
And then it's like, and I'm going to find a way to dispose of it safely, or I'm going to talk to the producer, and thankfully I've not encountered that situation, and I hope never to. But technically speaking, that is a criminal offense. Yeah. Sort of a weird space. And then obviously any real firearms, the RCMP has very, very clear rules about how real firearms work. And I believe, and this is again where people might have more information than me, blank firing, and I know it interacts with like the locations department, the police have to be notified, all these things. And I believe blank firing does fall under the Firearms Act and has much more clear rules. For myself, anything that enters into the Firearms Act, I do not touch. As a matter of personal policy with my team, there is no time ever that I would allow myself or my team on set to handle or be responsible for anything that could actually do harm to another person if mishandled.
For sure.
Because our department is responsible for so many other things. Things get lost, things get misplaced. And if there is any chance of real harm, I want my team to not, that requires 100% focus, and my team will never, by the nature of our department, will never be in a space where we're allowed to have 100% focus on that.
Yeah.
So anytime that I'm working on a show with firearms, that's immediately my line. And then, frankly, at union levels where we're talking about large numbers of BG, large numbers of firearms, dummy or otherwise, it kind of comes down to the production should shell out for an armorer to be there just to manage, because the last thing you want is some BG dressed as a cop walking down the street to get something from the corner store on lunch with a gun in a holster, and somebody making a phone call, and that BG's tackled or worse. And charged then with all manner of horrible things. So at that point, again, large numbers of BG or large numbers of firearms, I would advise to bring in like an armorer. But if it's something like okay, we have one character and they've got a gun holstered, I have in my kit plastic dummy guns that can sit in a holster, and all they have to do is look like it's there. It doesn't need to do anything. It doesn't need to move. And that space, we go through the same practice of clear and safe around, showing everybody on set, the first AD, the actors involved, the camera crew, anybody who might potentially see this thing. Hey, this is a piece of plastic or a piece of rubber. It in no way can do any harm to anybody. Yeah. But just so you know and you feel comfortable, we're demonstrating that for the crew, for the cast and the crew. And then that would be something that my team would manage.
Sure.
And oftentimes, too, I've even demanded like day calls on those days so that I can assign somebody, like your job is to stand there by the firearms table. And just every time a PG walks away from set, you grab that gun. Every time an actor walks away from set, you grab that gun. Yeah. And you stand here, and that's your job. Sorry. It's not a fun job, but it's your job.
No.
So and unfortunately, I think also in the indie space, like obviously the union has set a lot of these rules, as well they should. And I'm I was actually, I meant to say this earlier, just for you to know, conceptually, I'm a pro union person. My grandma's living on a union pension right now. Like as a human being,
Yeah.
all about the union.
Oh,
So
hey,
despite
I
not
feel
working in the union, you're not going to hear a whole lot of anti-union sentiment.
No,
from
and
me.
that's totally okay.
So it's good that the union has taken the stance of setting a lot of these rules. You know, and unfortunately, working in the non-union space, the money is different.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really, unfortunately, that's what it comes down to. The money is different.
Yeah.
You know, it's a hard sell to look at a producer who's got, you know, just nowhere near the amounts of money to throw around as a union producer and say, I need you to shell out $2,000 a day for an armor and a team to handle one plastic gun.
Yeah.
You know, so with that in mind, you know, my approach is that I'm capable and skilled and qualified to still maintain that safety.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd rather I do it knowing that I'm fully confident and fully safe with firearms than they just find somebody who will do it for cheaper. And
this random PA, hey buddy, your one job. Also, I'm gonna get crafty right now.
Yeah,
but actually, like it's funny enough that you mentioned this, and something that I actually haven't brought up on the podcast. But that's essentially what this podcast is for. It's for showing people that you can work in an indie scenario with learning all these aspects of the indie world and union. Mm-hmm. And keeping a high quality and a high standard. Mm-hmm. Because I'm also one of those people that I've worked in the union and I work in the indie, but I think like the union has been running at such a high level for so long because they put rules in place, trialed and tribulated to get to where they are. Mm-hmm. And which goes similarly to like the armor situation where it's like where do you draw your boundaries, and you've outlined it here, like nothing that goes into like the firing realm because of the safety element. And a lot of producers will ask you like, well, like let's cut this corner, but when you cut these corners, that's when someone might die.
Right. Well, and as we saw in the States, unfortunately, you know, and that is something that, again, it actually did take me some time when I started working in the props department here. Being that I am from a place where firearms are common and commonly used and safety is sort of a common practice, it was funny to me that even these pieces of plastic elicit a response from crew members and cast members who are unfamiliar with firearm practice and safety, excuse me. And, you know, with that in mind, something I like to tell my team very often is like, and it sounds very bad, but it comes from a place of love. Scared people do stupid things. And so a big, you know, that's my, when I'm training members of my team on firearm safety and best practice, at the end of the day, I tell them, you know, I will set the boundary with the production. Nothing you're doing like will ever result in a genuine safety issue, because that's my policy and that's what our responsibilities are as the props department. However, scared people do stupid things, and we need to make sure that every member of this cast and crew feel comfortable, feel safe, know what we know, that these are safe items that are basically just paperweights in scary shapes, so that they are better able to do their jobs, so that, you know, the grip isn't looking over their shoulder while they're hanging something, and God forbid they take their eyes off and something drops, or whatever it is, right? That's sort of a crazy hypothetical. But the point being that it's important to me that cast and crew feel safe, because that creates safety.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. And then it goes like, because on the project we're working on right now, and we're talking about like simunition, and I just felt like did a deep dive into like what is simunition and how does it alter. And then I was looking up the ACSAFE bulletin. So in I guess in BC, if no one's from BC, we have ACSAFE that we have to follow as an AD, and rules of how you're meant to apply certain scenarios. And it's even one thing that I found really interesting was that guns can't be pointed at the camera, no matter what. Like, it shouldn't ever be pointed at the camera team, and it shouldn't be pointed at the camera.
Is this all firearms or blank firing?
Blank firing.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is for blank firing. I'm sure there's different rules because it doesn't really cover it from what I saw. So anyone feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm sure I've been wrong many a times on this podcast. But from what I was reading, it was around the blanks, and anything that can create a projectile should never be pointed in the way of, it specifically outlined the camera team and the camera, and I'm sure that's because of a distance range. Which I just found very interesting. And like one thing that I like to mention for anyone who's an AD listening to this, that it's very important to put act safe bulletins on your call sheet and work with even the props master to find out what elements of safety need to go onto the call sheet, because like firearms or potential, I think that's the main, like firearms and weapons are the main
one,
thing that would go onto a call sheet for safety bulletins. And it's our job to also get those safety bulletins to production on an indie level, so the rest of the crew or whoever's involved on that day know what to expect, because not everyone reads the script. But speaking of scripts, let's take it back a little bit. When you're first brought onto a show, what are your steps? What do you do when someone's like, I want to hire Stafford, bring him on? What do you do first and foremost?
I never read the script.
Get the script, throw it out the window. We're making our own props, baby.
It's cowboy time. Reading the script, of course, is job number one. I have to know the story, the outline, these things. I've been lucky enough to have a production designer that I've worked with for a pretty significant amount of time now. And so him and I have a pretty solid rapport working with each other. So very often he'll even message me, because he's involved in meetings long before I'm ever on the clock. He'll often message me about certain things that maybe the production or the director is really specific about. It comes to mind once I had to do a blood draw, and they wanted that to be really well done and really quite accurate. And so long before I was on the clock, I just got a phone call saying, hey, just so you know, the director is really particular about this blood draw. You need to spend some time figuring out how we're going to pull that off, because it's going to fall on you. And like, I want you to kind of hit the ground running. Obviously, that kind of blurs the lines of like, well, I'm not really on the clock. Why am I thinking about work? But him and I, this production designer that I work with, have established a relationship that is kind of founded on that being okay. And we know where those boundaries are with each other. But, even within that kind of the context of that relationship, reading the script is always the first step. I tend to try to read through it, even just like kind of a skim or just kind of fresh eyes, read through it. And then I'll go and do a breakdown. I've seen from other prop masters, like everybody kind of does their breakdown in a different way. There's not like there might be some templates you can find, but I don't know how helpful they'd be. I found that Excel works really well for me. I've set myself up a template that works. I have like everything, and then I have different tabs with like, okay, graphics, playback, anytime there's special effects, even though it's not my responsibility, knowing that that's happening, these sorts of things. And then that allows me to update really easily and share with my team really easily. And that just tracks. I break down and I look at, I go through and pay attention to obviously anything that's scripted. Jesse takes a sip of her wine. All right, well, I got to have a glass of wine in the scene. But then I also think about what's not scripted. Okay, they're in a restaurant. Well, they might not say anything about it in the script. They're a restaurant. There's going to be other people, they have to have plates of food. They have to have drinks. The servers have to have notepads and napkins, possibly aprons if the costumes department doesn't want to do that. They're, maybe, okay, they're drinking wine. Well, let's have a bottle of wine available if the director wants that on the table. Like, it's a lot of interpreting the scene beyond what's scripted. So I go through that process. I break it down. Usually within the first day or two of being on the clock, there will be like a props concept meeting, or sometimes even just an art department concept meeting that I'll be involved with. And that's really like, I try to prepare boards, or at least I have, as I've kind of grown as a prop master. I've tried in the last several shows I've done to like prepare even some pretty minimal boards to share with just basic thoughts of like, okay, hey, in this scene, a great example was like early on the show, even before I was on the clock, there was a show a little bit ago I did in Calgary where they shifted from being on a ranch to being at like a high upscale resort. And that wasn't quite transitioned in the script yet, but it was something that the decision had been made by Hallmark and the production team that they were doing that. And so with that, my thought immediately jumped to, well, if it's a high-end resort, everything's got to be branded. They're going to slap that logo on everything. And so I just prepped a little board for that meeting to say like, okay, hey, you know, this is an idea that I've had. Maybe the director's going to hate it and say, nope, don't want it. I want no branding. Or maybe they're going to say, oh, that's so cool. Thanks. You know, and it's not just me saying that, but it also helps to have that visual of the boards. So that would be kind of my second step. I've also been lucky enough to have a pretty consistent crew that work with me. So usually I just kind of make a phone call and crew up. But in the event that somebody's not available, I'll go through the process of crewing up pretty early on as well. I tend not to do like it's interesting. I've never really had to like think about what are the steps that I actually do this job in. It's so much all over the place.
I just do it and everyone's there.
Yeah.
Movie gets made.
I tend to have at a minimum 2 weeks of prep, or I shouldn't say at a minimum. That tends to be pretty consistently what I have is 2 paid weeks of prep. Obviously more is always better, but 2 weeks for like MOW Hallmark indie projects, that's pretty consistently what I'm given and what I'm able to kind of pull off. I have a couple of rental houses that I work with consistently, one of whom's merch I'm wearing now, Rain City Props. You're the best. You're super cool. And so I'll reach out to them. I'll do, get all their paperwork sorted as fast as possible just to have it done. Putting in for like petty cash, the accounting forms are a really big part of the early process. But honestly, and then I try to do little bits of sourcing in the first week for like anything that's really big or really complicated. But it tends to be that like the sourcing of like it's more meetings in the first week. Meetings and like problem solving, planning, figuring things out. If there's like something really specific that I identify would be really hard to find, we'll source that in the first week. But then when it comes to like actually buying, okay, again, in that restaurant, I need 20 notebooks for serving staff and 20 pens. I know I can go to Staples and I can pick that up. So I don't really do that stuff until it's a little bit closer to production, because it also gives time to like, oh, actually, it's not a restaurant anymore. We're going to shoot this in their living room. So scratch all that. And now I've just wasted all that money and time. So it's mostly meetings first week. And then the big kind of final step of it all, or kind of semi-final step of it all, is the props show and tell. So that's kind of my big stressful meeting every show. It's a very stressful moment, because I like to think of it as kind of my one time that I have the undivided attention of the director, the producer. Production designer is usually present as well. And from time to time, even the set decorator pops in, just so that we're all on the same page. And that's kind of my time to share with them what I have, ultimately to convince them that I'm going to do the job well, and earn that confidence from them if I haven't already, and really just like nail down the details. I've got 3 backpacks here. Which one do you like? Or maybe they hate them all. And it kind of gives me that's the sort of stressful moment of like, I prep and plan and I do boards for those as well. Usually I bring in, obviously in the post-COVID world, I've been able to do them in person. During COVID, it was all over Zoom, but it's nice to do them in person again, because I can like hey, this physical object that your actor is going to be holding, do you like it? Rather than getting there on the day or a couple days before even, and all of a sudden it's a scramble. Oh, I freaking hate it. That's what that looks like in person? Get it out of here. So that's my big kind of, again, hope in a perfect world, it would be the final part of my prep. But inevitably there's things that they don't like, or things that they want to change, or things that they'll say, I want to go in a different direction. So I usually then spend the last day to 2 days, sometimes 3 if the show and tell is that early on in the prep schedule.
Do you have a structure of when, or a formula of when you prefer having that props meeting? Prop show and tell, sorry.
Yeah, of course. Never, like if we think about it like a Monday to Friday, I think the earliest I would want it would be like the Wednesday.
Yep.
And I would never want it on the Friday.
Yes.
Because like any earlier than Wednesday, and you're eating into my time to properly plan and give this presentation. And then on the Friday, I have no time to make changes without eating into weekend for myself and my team, which is I very often work weekends. I have a policy that my team does not ever work weekends. So that's it. Thursday is the perfect day. Thursday of last week of prep is the perfect world. Thursday in the afternoon, I've got time to set it up. I've got time to make sure that it's sparkly and clean, and the director's going to love it. And then, oh, hey, actually this backpack, hate it. Can we do something else? And I have time on Friday to source a bunch of other options and then potentially either put them in front of the director or just send emails saying, hey, I found like all these other options that are more in line with what your vision is. Let's, how do you feel, right? And then, obviously we go into production and then that's its own thing.
Yes. Yeah, no, 100%. And then they change everything again on the day.
Right. Of course. Yeah.
So in an indie sense, I know a lot of one huge thing with the art department itself is clearances, especially like in the union world where they would have, I'm pretty sure it's called a clearance department or something. They like you send your photos to the lawyers and they tell you if it's good enough to be not good enough.
Yeah.
Could you speak a little bit about that in the low indie sense of things as well as the higher indie being Hallmark?
Totally. So, really it comes down to it, like as we talk about in the low indie world, if you don't have any money, who's going to sue you? Really? Yeah. I mean, the things you can get away with when you have no money and you're not making any money on the project, you can kind of do whatever you want. And I very often have advised like smaller indie projects of that exact sentiment. It's like, if you ever go to sell this and you've got all these clearance issues, be mindful that a lawyer is gonna look at that and ixnay the sale because they don't want to take on that liability as soon as money's involved. If this is going to festivals, if this is for like a director gaining experience, gaining a name, those sorts of shorter films that are not intended to really, again, not ever intended to like sell and make $1 million or whatever, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, whatever the rules are, Disney's not going to waste their money coming after you for a Mickey Mouse shirt if you've got no money.
Like sue them for $20 million. Keep them in the ground. This is too good.
But obviously in the Hallmark space, like especially, using that as an example network, like they do have millions of dollars of money that somebody could come after. Yeah. And I even actually from the guy I kind of associate as being my mentor, the guy who put me in the prop mastering position and referred me to the role, actually had sort of a horror story where a director didn't like all these picture options that he had presented, and he was option after option, no, don't like it. And the director went and just picked something online and said, yeah, this is fine, it's cleared, I checked, like it's totally cool, we're going to use this. And apparently Hallmark got an email before the premiere had ended saying, you've used my work without permission.
Oh, no.
I expect compensation. So it is important. Like, when you're dealing with a network that has money, when you're dealing with shows that are being sold or have already been sold, you have to ensure that everything you do has no logos, aside from things that are either made by yourself in the production or are, there's some contracts for use. Again, that same show where we shifted to a resort instead of the ranch, the resort that we shot on in Calgary was actually like really invested in potentially, future stuff shooting there with Hallmark. And so it actually gave us the rights to use their logo work and their name. So we were able to use even a bunch of things that we pulled from their, like they had bathrobes and all these things because they were a resort and they had all these things already, which was nice to be able to source without having to go and get custom things embroidered. And so that was, in a situation where we were able to kind of use something existing with a little bit less concern. But as a general policy, any other time, it's got to get covered, it's got to get removed. And then there's the rule with Greeking of like a third different. Myself, I try kind of just always to do just custom stuff when it comes to logo work. My production designer likes to Photoshop people's faces onto things. So there's been a lot of times where it's like it is kind of packaging that then we'll have somebody's like Photoshopped into it from the art department. There's been some funny moments with that. But the general rule and the best practice is to just make everything yourself.
For sure. No, most definitely. So one thing we were talking about earlier, and this was in the way of Golden Delicious and doing reshoots. Mm-hmm. A question I have for, and I guess more advice for indie props masters or indie head of departments in general. How many favors do you call in, and what are the reasons for you calling in that? Like what makes you call in those favors? Because I could imagine a director whose first piece of work, they'll call in any amount of favors, all the favors they can get. But like, say for myself as an AD, I was like, well, what's the point? You know, like someone's going to look at my resume and it's not going to make any difference. It's just going to have the piece of work. What makes you call in favors, and when, or more often, when would you call in a favor?
That's definitely this. It's hard to nail down an exact thing. And I mean, you said it yourself. It does come down to a little bit like, how much do I value this project? And so, like in the case of Golden Delicious, I was actually art directing that before I was involved in the props department, and that project for me was really huge, a huge moment in my career. I feel like, so I invested quite a bit of myself into it, put a lot of time, energy, and effort, and did call in some favors to kind of make it happen. But ultimately now being where I am, I have sort of agreements, I would say, with some, prop houses and things that I work with that are mutually beneficial. And I wouldn't really ever call in a proper freebie favor for a Hallmark movie, because it isn't. At the end of the day, none of that's ever going to come back to me. They might say, and I have had producers and productions say, "Oh, if you can just do us this solid, we'll totally, we're going to hire you for the next one. It's going to be great." And then I never get that call. So it does come down to like knowing where to cut corners. It's often like, for me, it would be if there's a friend involved, if it's a project that like means something, if there's some value to myself, or I perceive some kind of value in like the project getting made. Again, referencing Golden Delicious, like it was really amazing to be a part of a project. And this is something I actually told the director while we were working on it. That I felt reflected a lot of my own kind of journey around queerness in film, and I felt like as we were making that project, I felt really connected to it. And obviously, like I don't watch Hallmarks. I have no connection to Hallmark really at all. So it is like it's a hard line. It's impossible to create a hard line of where or when I would call in a favor.
Yeah.
Obviously we just recently went through this. It was going to come up sooner or later. It was going to come up. We just went through this particularly challenging project for a lot of reasons. And there were a lot of favors called in to make that happen.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's a really great example of the downside of calling in favors when things go sideways. Yeah. Is unfortunately, we found ourselves kind of in a situation, in a pretty predatorial relationship. And I'm sure has sort of left lasting impacts. I know with myself, I know with my partner who's also involved, like it has had repercussions because of the favors that were called in, both to us and from us.
Yes.
So you have to protect yourself. I think is rule number one in the film industry. I'm really, again, as my career sort of grows in the props industry props department, and I grow as a prop master, it has become really readily apparent that like I have to, especially as a person in charge of other people, I have to be that first line of defense of like, no, you will not work that weekend because the production's not going to pay you the overtime, and that's their problem, you know. And of course it's always easier to give that advice to other people than it is for yourself. Yeah. And I've started to set up kind of my life and my structure around knowing that I'll have to work some weekends, but also, having the freedom to not be on set for 12 hours a day and that sort of thing. So it sort of evens out. Yeah. But it really does come down to like the industry, such as it is, will not remember those favors when the time comes. Yeah. So you have to make sure that you are protecting yourself and looking out for yourself. 100%. Which, for all the kids out there, like really, really hopeful, really, it's great industry, super happy. Everybody's just always having a great time. So chill. Yeah. Nobody ever yells at you, ever.
No, but that's actually some really sound advice. It's also like what you get in return, because I'd say like producers, directors are always quick to ask you to pull in whatever favors you want so that they can succeed. Mm-hmm. But what do you get in return? Because there is the downside of like you get super burnt with the favor you called in. Now you can never call it in again. And if it's something that you really feel passionately about, and that's a time that you really needed to use that favor, now you can't. I guess, it is a big downside to this industry that that it happens. I'm fortunate enough that as an AD, there's only certain, my favors are just asking someone to come on board.
Right.
I could only imagine as like a production designer or a props master, the amount of favors that people ask you to call in. And speaking of which, like, one thing I've been battling lately, I would say, in the indie realm, we get asked to do a lot of volunteer work because of our experience. And there's a lot of like friends, I'm sure, that call you in to ask you to do a project. What projects would you take on and why? And is it, again, because of the people or how you feel about it? Or because for me, what I've found is happening more often is proof of concept with the promise of a feature. But I also know, being from the indie world, that if proof of concept gets turned into a feature and someone's willing to spend $20-30 million on it, they're likely going to clean slate and bring on someone that has completed pieces of works like that. So what is your thought process on
that? I've heard a lot of, I mean, from friends and coworkers and such, I've heard a lot of opinions about this. Even some members of like my props team have expressed like they just don't do volunteer work. And that's their line. They're like, I'm a professional and I get paid for my work and I'm not interested in indie stuff and it doesn't really get me anything anymore. Which I think is absolutely fair. And there's been times where I felt quite burnt out by the indie scene and I've said I'm never going to do another one again. And then I always sign up for another one. So I've heard, like, one thing that I heard is like every project needs to do 2 of 3 things. It needs to either be creatively fulfilling, well-paying, or with people that you like, or for people that you like. With surrounding yourself with friends. And I've heard really like that's a good guiding compass. If I had to say like, okay, what's the rule? That's a pretty good rule. But just like everything else in the film industry, it's all so kind of up to interpretation and changes, and sometimes. If I've got bills due, and the difference of me paying rent or not is taking this indie project where I'm not getting paid or taking something else where I am getting paid. It doesn't really matter it has like, nope, I got to pay rent. I got to pay bills. That comes first, But then when things are slow, or if I am, when you're on the riding the high of, I just came off this show and I got all the money in the world, you free yourself up ultimately, I feel, to like pursue creative things, to pursue the art of it, the artistic side. So using as an example, like this project we're working on now, at the end of the day, like I know a ton of the crew. I know Nick, yourself, like all these people, and I know it's going to be a great energy. And then it's going to be fun. At the end of the day, it's going to be. I don't want to talk too much about it. I don't want to break any rules, but it's going to be. It's going to be a fun. It's going to be my first time working in that stage environment. It's set construction, which is fun, like working with my hands, that sort of thing. Like it would never be something that I would do instead of getting paid. Sure. But I'm not getting paid for anything right now because things are slow. So it's a great time, right? And even and as well, like there's also a space where, like, especially what I've found now, getting to the place that I am in the industry and being able now to communicate ideas effectively and to like manage more effectively within the industry. There's even spaces where, like, I've done projects where I've said, hey, I, have gotten this paid offer, but I want to do this thing with you. I can manage it. I can do the sourcing for you. I can help. I can crew it up for you so you won't be left high and dry. But ultimately, I have to, I do kind of have to follow the money. So I'm not going to be on set, and call me if there's issues. I'll be there when I can, as whatever flexibility I earn from my paid work, I'll dedicate. But, that is definitely, and actually, to speak to the uniqueness of the art department, jumping a little bit here, is like that is a unique part of the art department, is that the camera operator has to be there to do their job, but so much of what we do at higher levels in the art department is done before the camera even is put on a truck, and so much of that workload I can still do while doing other things, and then hand it off to somebody who I trust to do the set work, as my if my schedule demands.
You know what? Actually, that's a fantastic point and a good segue Do you take on more than one project at once because of that flexibility? Like, is it, I do a 20-hour work day today, I get 2 projects completed, and technically I work on both projects because you don't have to be there on the day? What do you usually do? What's your thought process?
I mean, well, again, you know, we were there. Yes. So no, it was yes. The short answer is yes, but there's a lot of considerations when doing that. At the end of the day, as much as we all wish we could give 200%, we can't.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, my gas tank can only ever be at 100%, and if I'm doing 2 shows, it's not ever going to get 100% of my attention. No one project is ever going to get 100% of my attention. There's some ways that you can manage that. I think like working in spaces where I've had bigger budgets, I can do things like bring on more labor.
Yeah.
There's even been times where like I've agreed to take pay cuts on one or both things that I'm working on in order to spread that money to my team, who will ultimately sort of face a bit of higher pressure as a result of me not giving 100%. So there's a lot of considerations when making the decision to do multiple things. It does come down to a little bit like how hard, like, you know, again, taking as an example, this experience, we'll call it, that we had this last summer. You know, with that show, I had already, unfortunately, by just the nature of the budget, found myself kind of faced with making choices around like paying my team or paying myself anywhere near kind of fair wages, as unfair as they were at the end. And I made that choice in support of my team in part, in no small part, due to knowing that I had an offer for like proper paid work, which I took. And I kind of made that same argument on that show of like, okay, I'm going to do as much of the prep work as I can, and then I'm going to leave this to people who I hope are capable and competent. And there were some issues there with some things which you know, I don't want to get into, but at the end of the day, that was kind of the choice that I had to make. And then it turned into a lot of ferry trips, a lot of weekends, and a lot of pretty long and harsh hard month. Which, if I'm taking anything from that experience, I would never do it again with shows in 2 different areas. 2 local shows, like the logistics of how to support 2 local shows. So much easier than a show on an island, a ferry trip away, and a show local.
With a 2-hour drive.
Yeah, like, so that was definitely a growing pain for me of like, I can't do it if they're that far apart. It's just impossible. It's impossible to manage because the added logistics and time, I can't show up to fix a crisis. You know, I'm 6 hours away. Like, there's nothing I can do in this moment. So that was a big, like, I would never do 2 shows not in the same place again. And then with that as well, like, it is fundamentally, you cannot do it unless you're at the top of your department.
Yes.
You know, I would love if I could offer my assistant props person the freedom to do whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted. I lean on her very heavily as the person who can't do whatever she wants whenever she wants to. So, you know, and again, there's been times where like I've made the offer to her of like, in the event that we are doing multiple shows or I'm doing multiple shows, I'm going to be leaning on you a lot harder, and I'm going to translate that into more money for you. Yeah. You know, out of respect for what that means in her world in terms of work. You know, and I think again, like I said, there's the film industry. There's no absolute rule.
Yes.
So it does come down to a lot of the like nitty gritty details of like where the shows are located, how big the budgets are on the shows. You know, a big thing. This is actually another like thing that I've sort of set as a harder boundary in my mind is, especially in the indie world, you'll get props departments. I mean, I've never ended up working one other than like an indie short where I was just by myself in the department. But even on some larger scale indie works, you'll have your prop master and an on-set. You have 2-person team. And fundamentally, the props department requires 2 people on set at all times. For a functioning and well functioning props department, you have to have 2 people, which then means the prop master has no choice but to focus 100% on that one thing and be there for the 12-hour day. At that point, if any show that I'm doing requires that, as much as I don't do them anymore, in the event that ever happened, that would immediately mean I could not be doing 2 projects at once. just by the nature of like I can't physically be in two places at once. But in shows where I've been given the labor to like potentially even bring on day calls for intense days, have a minimum of a truck assist and an on-set and myself, there's room there to say my job naturally then is not on set as much. I'm doing all of the prep work ahead of time while the team manages the set.
It makes sense. It's not sustainable for the props master to be there for 12 hours a day, every single day, and prep for the next episodes whilst he's managing the set.
Yeah, buddy. Yeah.
Who does the bike?
On my way home. Still, off the clock, but working.
Would you say there is an essence of paying your dues on the come up?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yes, absolutely. 100%. Again, speaking as somebody who's never worked in a union structure, where the rules are a little bit clearer, and more than anything else, where there's somebody to go to bat for you, where if you call the union and say, this AD is demanding I work before call time and won't give me a pre-call, you need, send out the dogs. Let's get this fixed. Obviously that creates a very different, environment of where the rules are really set. There's boundaries, there's lines, and there's somebody to fight for those lines. Yeah. Outside of that space, absolutely, you're kind of expected to take the extra, work on, do the extra thing, take the low rate. And it does come down to, like, if I think about it, would I go back and do those shows now? Never. I would never go back and do that. Some of those shows that I did now, with the skills that I have, the kit that I have, the people that I have, I would never go back and do those things again. And I have even declined work that's of that kind of caliber. But would I be where I am without having done those things? Absolutely not.
Yes.
I got my opportunity to be a prop master on a show where it was me and one other person, and it was just the smallest little budget. And the first handful of shows I did were the smallest little budget with me and one person. And, I didn't really know that wasn't normal until I got to a place where I could see and established myself around people who knew what it was supposed to look like and could kind of say, hey, this quality where you can have a life is actually where it's supposed to be.
Yes.
So, again, I think as far as my personal journey goes, yes, I did a lot of just what I could to get where I am.
And it's so true, especially if like you're trying to climb the ranks as fast as some of us are. It's like you have to pay those dues because you encounter the weirdest scenarios, especially in the indie world. And I completely agree with you. A lot of the shows that I've done for free or come on as a favor, I would not touch at this point in my life, but very grateful that I did it for the experience that I got at that time. And I think it's one of those, if people say that you can't learn in the film industry unless you like get into a union role and go up the ranks, you definitely can. It's called the indie industry.
Right. Yeah. It's just, you're in a much different world and the rules are a little
You
shaky,
might not learn the actual things you're meant to know, but you'll definitely get the skills to manage when you're in a position that you have everything you need. And if anything, it only makes you a better prop master, head of department, when you get into a world that you can hire that extra person because you've worked in all those positions as one person to know what you can expect from different people, I'd imagine.
Yeah, it is interesting. As we kind of chatted earlier, like I am in process of working on union applications and getting that paperwork done, hopefully to be able to jump into higher caliber of shows in the union world. But I'm faced really with like an interesting sort of conundrum in my mind is I very accidentally ended up as a prop master. It was not really originally my intention. I fell in love with the department, and I've been lucky enough to have the opportunities that I have had and move as quickly as I have. But also, I've really not ever done a run of show as an on-set props person or as a truck person. I've fulfilled those roles out of obligation when necessary as a prop master, but it isn't really a job I have experience in doing, other than knowing what I expect from my team and filling that role when I need to. And if I do, when I do join the union, it's going to result in a demotion, really, just practically speaking. I would love it if I go straight in as a prop master. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
But practically speaking, I'm going to end up working for somebody else. And I'm going to have to kind of refigure out what the boundaries of that role are. There's going to be a lot less freedom, to set myself up. I can't do 2 projects at once because somebody is going to rely on me to be the body there for 12 hours. And it's going to significantly change the dynamic of like, what does my kit look like? I don't necessarily have, I have an on-set kit that I give to like my on-set people. But I don't necessarily have what I imagine the union would consider like an on-set props person's kit, curated or tailored to exactly how they expect things to be done. And so I'm going to have to kind of do some renegotiating on what are the boundaries and expectations for myself and from those people I work with in those roles, moving into that space.
I think there's also a value that takes place getting that demotion into the union world, because there are all these nuances. I guess it's nuances if it's indie. I don't know. There's all the in the union world. There's like, I like to think of it like, for an AD, there are so many little things that I have never gotten to experience simply because I've only been an AD in the indie world, where it's like, what do I do when I've never encountered a situation that a cast member has to change their flight, and because we're only shooting in these certain days, do I have to rearrange a whole schedule? Do I tell production they move? I would imagine the same happens when you go in as a props assist or the truck supervisor. You'll learn all of these things that you wouldn't have been able to encounter until being put in that role, which will own you coming in with the knowledge that you have, and then getting taught new things from your prop master will only be more valuable, and you'll be coming in at a much better stage even at that lower demotion.
Yeah, well, and that's something that like moving into the union and kind of taking that demotion is like, I would love for the mentorship. Yeah. That's something that has definitely, there's been some times where I've hit road bumps in my prop mastering career just from not knowing what I didn't know. And I'll save this for later because I know you've got a question coming about worst days on set. And this is one of those times where it kind of was a lot of things, perfect storm, but one of them was something that I just didn't know. I didn't know. There was and it wasn't very intuitive that it would be my responsibility, but it was expected of me. And because it was expected, nobody mentioned it. And then we got to the day and it was like, what do you mean you don't have this? So it would be, I'd look forward, to as awkward as that transition might end up being, it does open the door to a lot of mentorship. And actually, interestingly, I sort of recently went through a process with the Seattle Theater Union, because I work in that kind of events theater world as well, and their process involved like an interview and a test and sort of this to get on their like skilled permittee list. And one of the things that came up in the interview many, many times was like they would often, I would say, they would do a skill sheet, and I would say, okay, well, I've been a prop master, I've managed a department, I know how props work, I know how to fabricate them, or I certainly know how to manage a fabricator. Like these are skills that I have, but they brought up really fair points about like, yes, but within our industry, if somebody looked at you and said, I need X piece of paper, and you don't know what that piece of paper is, and you're the guy in charge, well, there's problems really fast. Yeah. And I kind of expect that transitioning from the non-union into the union space, there will be some similar, like a producer who's used to dealing with union prop masters or production designer who's used to dealing with union prop masters is going to say a word about a piece of paperwork or the way that it's structured or what it needs to be. And if I don't have the answer, because it's just not something I've ever come across or been asked for, or that word is a different word than what I'm used to hearing, whatever it might be, it starts to create friction, and enough times of that adding up, and somebody's going to start asking, "Who the hell is this guy? And why did we hire him?" So it pays. I think it really pays to have mentorship. It does, and you can do so much in this industry, especially in the indie space, like figuring it out, relying on your own skills, being good in the scramble. There's so much that you can learn and do there. But as the trajectory of my career has gotten me into bigger and bigger shows, it really has started to click for me that like, I'm good in a scramble, and man, can I figure things out. And that's what's gotten me this far. Yeah. But as the stakes get higher and higher and higher, I need to be scrambling less and less and less and less. There needs to be more knowledge, more time, more focus on the prep work. Like that really needs to improve for me. And that's a space where like mentorship would really be valuable.
What is the saying? The more you know, the less you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that will take us to a quick break here, and we'll be back on the other side of this.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
All right.
Welcome back to this side of the break with Stafford. So before we dove a little bit more into your realm of expertise and what you would do when you first start off a show, there's a few things we didn't cover, though, that I just want to quickly mention on this back end. The first one that was brought up is when dealing with weapons, what's the value with, let's say, knives, butterfly knives, any different types of knives, swords, because that's probably more common in, I guess, an indie sense, or even like I'm sure Union deal with them potentially more than guns, but we put a lot more emphasis on those. Or what's your experience essentially?
Yeah, I mean the guns are scarier, so there is a lot more like clarity of rules and specific rules around firearms use. But a knife is equally as dangerous, ultimately, depending on what you're doing with it, at least. So there's a kind of a couple of different lines. Obviously, the moment that it's involved in a stunt, the moment that there's any like special effects involved, then I defer basically to those technicians. I go to the stunt person. I say, hey, here's what I have for options. Do you want a rubber? Is it such that, you're comfortable? Do you want like a bladeless? Whatever their comfort level is, and they're responsible for the actor safety and the actor action. So they determine and they inform me what their expectations are, and then I fulfill those expectations. If for some reason it was something like I've had some pretty weird stunt weapons. I had like cuticle trimmers once, which was not something I could find a rubber of, and didn't really have the time or the budget to like fully fabricate a proper stunt of this item. Yeah. So what I ended up doing was doing multiple layers of epoxy. So I had obviously one that was just fresh and clean and pretty in silver, and then one that was just covered in clear epoxy to give it a dulled and kind of rubbery texture to make it safe. And ultimately, that was something that myself and the stunt coordinator discussed. We discussed with like the director around what their expectations for the actor. They were just stepping on it. So it was even something where like the only shot where you actually saw them stepping on it was one where they didn't have to put their full weight on it because one of their feet is out of frame. So we get them putting just enough pressure to make it look like they're stepping on it, but they're not really at really any harm's way. So those that was all a conversation had basically. And that's really what it comes down to in pretty much any case where you're using weapons of any kind in stunts.
Follow-up question with that. Is there ever because there's I've seen dulled blades being used on set. Is there ever a real blade that would be used on set? Specifically, let's say a kitchen scene and we're seeing the actor, let's say chopping something.
Yeah, so that's, I mean, it yes and no. I've had kitchen knives that just need to be dressed in, where you're not really seeing them do the action of chopping, and I have like a plastic kitchen knife that can sit on a table somewhere. But there is, of course, like you can't pre-cut the apple in any way that looks reasonably realistic. They do have to be cutting the apple, and that comes kind of down to ultimately a bit also like the AD department determining, is cutting an apple a stunt? As everybody cuts an apple, everybody can kind of competently and safely cut an apple, hopefully.
You hope.
Yeah, you hope. And that's, there is a space where like, I'm, again, speaking as somebody who's never really worked at the union level, like, yeah, what is it the union where they have much more money and much more strict rules? Would they maybe say, yeah, we expect a stunt coordinator for them cutting these apples because it's a real knife? No. In my world, no. You would rely on like the actor is a functioning adult and they're capable of cutting an apple safely without cutting off your finger.
You'd hope.
I mean, actors can be interesting, but I hope they at least have that minimum qualification.
Sure.
But then again, anytime that you're involved in like any stunt work, anytime as well that even if it isn't stunt work, if it's like, I guess falling is a stunt. So even if they're not using the knife in the stunt per se, but the moment that it is engaged in any action that would be like kind of contrary to like its common use or engaged in some action other than something that's like sort of minimum competency to be an adult you would need, I would want to have a dulled reel. So there's camera friendly, the most camera friendly option is always the real thing. So we have, we'll take and dull the edges of real knives. And then you'd have a rubber as well. And then very often, if it's being used to actually like stab somebody or hurt somebody, you might have a bladeless or like a part that is intended to kind of special effects might make like a plant on. So it sits there and it looks like it's in the person. And that I provide just like the bladeless match to whatever the knife was that was used. And then special effects will do all their prosthetic work. I'm sorry, I think I totally blocked the mic there.
No.
But yeah, so it's a little bit more like because guns have so many more rules that are strict, there's a little bit more clarity there, but it always comes down to ultimately a conversation between myself and the other technicians in the room, and then the director and the actors as well about their comfortability and what they expect and what they need for the shoot.
Cool. And then my next question is, and this is more of an indie sense, how often do you deal with the director as opposed to the production designer?
Well, that's interesting. So I ultimately am employed directly by production. It's not like the production designer is signing my checks, but at least from my perspective, that's the person who hires me. Yeah. It's pretty rare that a director or a producer would come to me directly. They would hire a production designer who would then crew up. So fundamentally, I am incentivized to keep my production designer happy. But to his credit, he is happy when the director's happy and the production is happy. So very often, if there's something he needs to know or if there's questions I have for him, I will ask those. But then I do just discuss things directly with directors and producers. I discuss budgets with production managers. Like a lot of that is the onus to do all that is on me. If there's something, I might sometimes give him a warning. Hey, I'm about to go talk to the production manager. I need some more money to do X, Y, Z that they're asking for, just so you're not caught off guard by like, what do you mean you need more money, but later. But it is ultimately my responsibility to manage the props department. So it's kind of a hybrid of both. A lot of things run through him. A lot of things I just handle myself.
And then lastly, I know I said I only had 2 questions, but that just brought up another one. When doing an indie and you're asked to provide a budget prior to seeing locations or even finalized script, do you have a formula that you follow, or are you just winging it? Is to secure a job? What do you do? Is there a formula?
Kind of, like I hate getting asked without being given a number to at least know the ballpark, and then I can say I need more or that's suitable. I hate being asked to just come up with a number.
It's like, how much have you got?
Right. Because, and ultimately that is like, if I wanted to do everything a certain, at the highest quality with maximizing my potential skill and make everything run smoothly and perfectly, yeah, there's a very high amount of money I'm going to need. I want to pay my people a fair rate. I want to, all these things but I know fundamentally these indie projects don't have that. They just don't. And so, in a way, to me, anytime I'm asked, like before being given a number, at least as like a working frame of reference, to just come up with a number, it to me feels, whether or not it's true, but it always comes across to me as a producer or director producer, both, whatever it is, production team, trying to basically see if I'm the cheaper option, like kind of trying to suss out, am I gonna cut the corners for them? Am I gonna make it work on the no money and compromise my professional integrity potentially, or safety potentially? And regardless of whether or not that's true, like that's always ultimately what it kind of comes across to me if they say, oh, what do you think this project needs? Well, I think it needs $1 million because I'd like $1 million. So that's what I'm going to tell you. It's, but to be, even to react to that question more professionally, it's like, it's a hard thing to ask because I have worked in shows where I don't have the budget to get doubles of everything. I absolutely it's one is none is a phrase that gets tossed around a lot. Like ultimately, not having doubles of things is a recipe for disaster. Something breaks, something goes missing, an actor goes home with something, like whatever it is, you should really always have 2 of everything, but that's doubles the expense. Yeah. And plenty of productions don't have the money to do that. So, again, it's like if you're not going to give me at least a number that you have in your head, it always feels like you're looking for me to lowball.
Yeah. I'm on the exact same sentiment because it's like, obviously you're going for I would imagine as a producer, you're going for, if you're doing a bid for something, you have a number in your head that you think will win the bid, which means I'd imagine you have a breakdown of what you should be giving each department, and then it's like, okay, well, find something around this. Is this doable, as opposed to like come up with a number? Because if you give like, oh well, like $50,000 is what I would do if this was a $1 million set, or
Right.
or $2,000 if this was a $20,000 set. Like apples to oranges. How big is the room we're dressing?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and especially working as like, in set tech, it's so dependent on the locations. Like there's flexibility around, is the location going to come mostly with the dressing you need? You have to is it a studio where you've got to provide everything?
I only imagine that if you give a number, there's a big like right-handed column where it's like, if we get this thing, then this budget can go down. If we don't get this thing, then double this number.
Right. Well, and that is tricky. And oftentimes when I'm even sending in preliminary budgets, there's so often kind of, even I throw kind of numbers in there, a bit of guesswork. And I tend to err on the side of more money and give myself contingencies and all these things to sort of plan for the inevitable overages. But there is a lot of I'm not going to go on Amazon and price out every cup I'm going to buy, every flower I'm going to buy. I'll go, and this kind of speaks to what we talked about before around prep of that first week. If there's big things that I identify as this is going to be a problem or something I have to figure out or something that's going to require time, energy, effort, or money, that I'll do the hunting for in that first week. And in my preliminary budget, that's often due at the end of that first week, I'll be able to say, yeah, this is going to cost this much money. And normally I focus on those things also because those would be the things that would put me at hey, I need more money. Your director's asking for, I just recently had a show where we had a scene kind of balloon up in every meeting about it. And there were meeting after meeting after meeting, but we never really got answers. And every time it was discussed, the scene got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, involving fire trucks, firefighters, cops, special effects, all these things that just kind of kept getting bigger and bigger. And thankfully the production manager was really good about saying as it ballooned up, we need more money. And I was able to do that. But that comes, kind of down to but then in that movie, I didn't send in to the production manager every line item of I'm going to buy $5 mugs and I'm going to buy $20 of paper. And it kind of comes down to, I say, okay, I have, some fixed costs. My kit rents for a certain value, but even that number's flexible if I have to. I know what printer ink costs. I know I'm going to go through a cartridge of it at least. Paper goods, these sorts of things. There are a lot of things that I can say, okay, it's going to be $200 there and probably $400 there. And there's how many scenes with food and I'm going to need these many resets. It's probably about $1,000 in food. And I kind of crunch those numbers in a little bit more of a vague sense, except for those much bigger, much more specific things where I can say no, that's going to cost you X amount of dollars because it's this big thing that's ballooning. And that ultimately works, in my opinion, as a better frame of reference. They say, we've got 10 grand. I crunch the numbers. I say, okay, I can spend, this much on this much on this much on this. Oh, this really weird specific thing that you need is going to cost actually $5 grand. Well, hey, I can't give you half my budget for one scene. That's just not practical. So we need to either lower that scene or you need to find the money. And that's a frame of reference of I know what they're dealing with. They know what they expect of me. And then as things change over the course of the production or prep process, things can be flexible from that point.
No, that makes sense. Then that's a fantastic answer. Now we get to the nitty gritty of it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, as you've heard or may not have heard, it's a question I like to ask on this podcast.
I'm ready.
What is your make it or break it day on set? And it doesn't have to be as a props master. What's the day that's just been the worst in existence, but you looked at it and you're like, you know what? I love the film industry.
Yeah. So the second show I ever prop mastered, which I'm not going to name, just keep it as anonymous as possible here, was pretty intense. It was pretty intense. It was a horror movie, a slasher, so lots of weapons, lots of guns, just so much, and no money. And there was a lot of issues. There's a lot of issues throughout the whole production. but there was a particularly bad, day. The day before, a prop had gone missing that originally they weren't going to use, and I had been told they weren't going to use, which is probably why it departed my brain. And then they changed their mind at that scene. They said, "No, actually, we need it back. We want it." And I had stepped away from set to do some things because we were doing night shoots at the time, and I needed to go do more sourcing, and also somewhere get some sleep. So my on-set calls, "Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? We don't have it." So it kind of came right on the heels of that. So sort of a 2-day story, I guess, 2-day make it or break it, which was really hard to like come in the next day. To their credit, the first AD was dealing with some really hard things. The production company was doing 2 shows at once as a very small production company. And unfortunately, the other show was commanding a lot more of their attention, which meant that there wasn't a lot of production support, which was really hard to deal with. And the first AD ended up taking on a lot of that responsibility. But unfortunately, a lot of their stress came down on my department. And one of the things that, was sort of causing these issues was like, I got reamed a couple times because the props chairs weren't ready at call, weren't like set up at Village at call. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, the camera department hasn't even set up. Like Village isn't set up, but I'm getting kind of reamed for basically not working off the clock early in the morning. And so at that point, I was also skipping breakfasts pretty much every day to come in and set things up and do this work. It was a show where it was just me and my on-set, so there was not a whole lot of labor support, a lot of responsibility for me, and honestly, my on-set as well. And finally, there were 2 kind of make or break moments in this one day that really just, I went home and just really thought like, do I really want to do this? Do I really want to do this to myself? And one of them was that, again, earlier on in my career, basically I had said, you need an armorer because you've got guns like every day, all the time, guns everywhere. And then, they said, okay, well, we can't give you one every day, but pick the days basically where like you need that support. Yeah. And I had them for a couple days, but then the production needed to like make cuts so that the lighting department could get more lights because it was slowing everything down. And again, the AD of all people, again, understanding the pressure they were under, came to me and was like, can you cut your armor? And I shouldn't have. I mean, I look back now at this moment, like in the position I'm in now in the career, where I am at in my career now, I would have said absolutely not. Like, this is a safety issue. You're not compromising on it. Yeah. At the time, I was still trying to kind of, do my time and earn that favor. So I said, okay, yeah, I called the armorer. The armorer basically left and rented me the firearms, and then was comfortable with me managing them from that point kind of forward. We'd done our bigger days already. And at one point, a firearm walked away from set with one of the actors. And I got a big call over the walkie from the second AD about like how unacceptable it was and got reamed out for that. At the same time as we had squib firing. I did not know, because I was so kind of new to things and had never been on a set with this kind of caliber of special effects and firearms. It is the props department's responsibility to provide safety equipment for the crew. Oh. At least as it comes to like harnessing and things like of that nature are on the riggers. But then when it comes to like squibs, blank firing, the like Lexan is provided by the grips. But like I have to provide eye protection and ear protection, which I did not intuit that another department doing something was going to impact like my requirement to provide safety. I was like, well, special effects is the one making the loud noises. Yeah. Why are they not providing the ear protection? But, it came down on me, and it became this quite large issue of basically, we're not going to shoot this scene without ear protection. Somebody needs to go and get it. And I'm like, well, I'm tapped to $1 million. And thankfully our health and safety guy zipped away for a little bit, went and grabbed ear protection and came back. And I think actually, funnily enough, he bought like a big jumbo thing of the foam ear things. And I still have it in my, as part of my like safety gear.
It feels like it should fall on that health and safety person anyway, though.
I mean, it's one of those weird things that like I understand from the AD's perspective. I went and I talked to the ADs about it afterwards, and I said why was this put on me? And he said, I said I've never seen this be my responsibility. And the AD looked at me and said, on every show I've worked, it's been the props department responsibility. So I don't know what to tell you. Like, this is weird or not, it's the industry standard. You were expected to have it. You didn't have it. It's a problem. Yeah. And so kind of all of these things like building into one. Already the special effects guy, who I've had the pleasure of working with since then, and it's been a much more positive experience. But on that show I was also already having issues with like miscommunications that had occurred in prep, where I'm saying I'll provide you with this thing for you to rig, and it being kind of misconstrued or misunderstood as like, okay, I'm just going to rig it. And I'm like, well, I don't want to do that. That's not what my skill set is. And vice versa too, him, providing me something so that I can Greek it. And then me thinking, okay, well, you're going to take and rig it right. And it's like, well, no, it's in your hands now. It's your problem. So a lot of that show was full of just things like that, and all of it for less money than I'd ever work for again. So that was, I came home from that day with the ear protection and the firearm issue, and really had to think like, okay, am I going to keep doing this? Like, is this going to be worth it? And when that show ended, I had some time off. I did some events and AV work for a little while, and then the next show that I worked on proved to be one of the best shows that I've ever worked on, which I'm hoping it comes out this year, fingers crossed. And was just another like really, really fun. Like I think about kind of on par with Golden Delicious in terms of like fun crew, fun cast, comedy. So everything was light. The director was a sweetheart and a dream to work with. Like, and so I think that had I had another show following that one, following the make or break moment that was in any way close to that level, I think I probably would have walked away. Yeah. I was very lucky to have an opportunity pretty much immediately after that proved to just be like amazingly positive. And now that I've had that and been able to see like, okay, it goes up and down, and it's never going to be always good, I've been able to prepare myself a little bit more for the impacts of like, you are going to have bad shows that 100%. Are going to, and they're usually going to be like, I've pretty consistently noticed good show, bad show, good show, bad show, good show, bad show. But if you can't make it through the bad show, you'll never get to the next good one.
No, 100%, which is a fantastic segue to the mental health of it all.
There we go. Love it.
So how do you make it through days like that? What is there a reminder? Is there something that you do for yourself to recognize that not all days are going to be like that? And if you are going through one of those days, is there something that you can do to make that day not so bad?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really something I've stumbled on recently, in my sort of growth in my career. There's a really hard thing you have to do working as a professional artist, and not just as like an artist for personal, or even I would argue like specifically in this industry, I guess, as an artist. You have to put a piece of yourself into your work and still somehow not care. Like if you just truly don't care, you'll not get very far, because at least in the creative side of the industry, no offense to the grips, because I've got some really good grip friends, but they have the luxury of kind of just pick it up, put it down, do the thing. I don't really have to care about the art of it all, right? But working in the art departments, you do have to care to a certain degree. You have to put yourself in it. You have to love what you do. You have to have the ideas and the artistic inclination to bring a vision to life. But when somebody doesn't like that vision, when a director is under mountains of stress about something that has nothing to do with your department or you, and they go off because one little thing was out of place, you have to be able to separate yourself from it. You have to be able to kind of say, nope, you know what? Like this isn't my life. This isn't all that I am. This is just work. Yeah. And that's really, really hard to do. It's really hard to do. And the only way to do it is to learn. Like there's no secret. I don't have any mantras. I very often have stepped away from set and just found a quiet place to do just some personal kind of meditation. Yeah. That's been quite helpful in times of really high stress. But it's also very hard to do that, because if you walk away in the middle of a crisis, you're going to hear about it. Yeah. That's the opposite of what the production wants you to do, even if it's what you have to do for your mental health. Yeah. So it's important, I think, also to have like your crew, the people that you are with, your department head, my production designer and I have a pretty awesome relationship in that we can communicate with each other about these mental health issues and these moments of like really high stress and anxiety. And we've had a lot of conversations about, there's been times where I've kind of mouthed off back, and he's had to kind of pull me aside and say, hey buddy, look, like, I think, what did he say once? He said, a fart in the wind could end a career. Like, just go remedy that. Like, it's, you know, I know what you're feeling. I know how much it sucks, but like, I'm going to be the professional here telling you, like, you got to fix that.
Yeah.
And it, you know, it takes having those people around you. It's a group effort. We all know how much it sucks on those days where it sucks. And more often than not too, like, there's been times where again, thankfully the team that I'm part of is really, really tight and we're really helpful to each other. We really lean on each other. And so there will be times where it's not my department. My department might be kicking ass. They love the props. They're super happy. Everything's great with the props department. But maybe the costume design team is just really getting just beaten to crap every day. And it's identifying that in other people and supporting them. And being a part of a crew that you know is going to support you back.
Yeah, that's a big thing, especially being a head of department, that you have to recognize when something like that is not only happening with your team, but maybe for another team, like you're saying, like costumes, especially props working so closely with costumes some of the times there. I don't know. It is one of those things. It's a big collaborative effort, and it takes a village to make a movie. And I think what I hope from the film industry is that we're going to, well, it's more outspoken when someone's having mental health issues on that day or need to step away, and it's not like, well, everything's going to shut down right now. Like, I've had moments where even a director is like, look, shoot this shot. It's pretty basic. Yeah. I need 5 minutes.
Yeah. It's on you guys. You can figure it out. Yeah.
But I hope we're working more to a stage like that. And it's great to know that you know how to recognize that in your team. And even your bosses will tell you when is okay to step aside or when you can have that time off. And I can only imagine how difficult it would be on those shows that you've only got yourself and your one on-set props person. Yeah. Because it seems like there is never a time that you can have those moments. What do you do in a situation like that? That if you do you just bite the bullet, so to speak, and walk away for a second, turn off the radio, and like 5 minutes, whatever happens? Or...
Yeah, I mean, I don't do shows without the proper crew anymore. I just, as a matter of professional boundary and what I know it does to my mental health, I don't do it anymore. So,
well, that's a great answer in itself.
Right.
You just won't take them anymore because it will put you in that.
Totally. And as we talked about before, like, I know those shows got me where I am, and I would never do them again, but I don't regret having done them in the past. But yeah, it just, the inability to walk away is a problem, you know. And again, you know, in a crisis, I think, funnily enough, in a true crisis, something's broken, something's missing, something needs to get changed right now. It's easier to detach yourself and just focus on what you need to do. But when it comes down, but then at the end of that, you have to be able to walk away and breathe and say, that really sucked. You know, the director changed their mind 5 minutes before rolling, and I had to pull the rabbit out of the hat. Yeah. You know, and you do it in that moment, and there's kind of a weird like fugue state you go into to fix it. And then you have to be able to walk away. Sure. And that's where having the proper crew, having the proper support, the proper budgets, all these things become so important.
Yeah. I would say a caveat to that is, testimony is, the indie industry is a perfect breeding ground to learn what your boundaries are and how to set them. Because it's exactly that, like going through these horror shows to work out, like, this is my line. Even like with the armor stuff, this is now my line, and knowing how to put those in place in the future. Which brings us to the questions, the quick, fast, sped questions. I've asked the people have answered. These are the questions for you to give answers to them.
I'm ready.
What do you do when you have a creative block?
Interesting. When I have a creative block.
Do you get creative blocks?
Well, and this is kind of the weird space, I think, with the props department. I certainly am within a creative, artistic space. But at the end of the day, I don't think of myself necessarily as like a high artist or a film artiste, you know. Um, yeah, I don't, the baguette and the cigarette with a filter, none of that. Like, at the end of the day, the director comes to me with a vision, and I am responsible for fulfilling that vision.
Yeah.
So with that, I don't necessarily get creative blocks per se, because I do have kind of another person saying, this is how I want it this color, I want it this way. And there's areas for me to extrapolate. They might not say I wanted a certain color, they might say I wanted a certain size, and then it's up to me to have color options or input some of myself. Again, things like saying, why don't we put the logo on everything? Those are spaces where my creativity gets to shine. But ultimately, if I've never found myself in like a props creative block. I've had technical issues out the wazoo, but creatively speaking, I don't really think I've gotten a block. What I have gotten is drained, very drained before. And that's part of like burnout and these things. Like, I've definitely found myself in a space where, like, man, 3 Hallmarks deep, and it's the same wine glasses and the same purses, and it's the same white ladies and white guys, and like, what is art? Like, what am I doing? Am I even an artist? And for me, actually, I think the origin of my creativity, I'm going to tip my hand as a nerd here, is D&D. And I've discovered the hard way a number of times in my life where I haven't been playing D&D, and then times where I have been, how important to my mental health and my creativity it is. I run games, and being able to craft that world, that fictional space, play the games, meeting. I mean, we're all adults and lives are crazy, so it's really not even a consistent schedule, but just being able to meet even semi-consistently creates that kind of foundation. That's my space of like, this is my art. This is what fuels me and feeds me. And then I can walk into that Hallmark office and say, yep, you want the same, like this and that. And okay, yep, check. You want the thing. All right, they're thinking in this scene, so of course they're drinking coffee. You don't even have to ask. And like, it's night in this scene. Of course they're drinking wine. Like, yeah, of course. Like, it's the same.
Stuff that just
Cookie
makes
cutter.
sense.
Yeah. So I think that's more what it comes down to for me anyway. And again, other prop masters and other props people can speak kind of for themselves, but I've found that it's more about not getting that little bit of creativity like sucked out of you by the industry.
Yes. Yeah. No. And that's one thing I love about the indie industry. It feels like you get, I don't know, even as an AD, I'm like, oh, it feels so much more creative.
Yeah.
What was your process when you became a props master, or in becoming a props master?
Okay, my story is very unique. I had a weird circumstance that put me in the position that I am in. So anybody watching, do not take this as the roadmap. I started, I moved here 4 years ago, knew I wanted to get into film, didn't know anything about filmmaking, didn't go to school for it, didn't want to go to school for it, started doing some volunteer projects, had no idea what the roles were, but one day basically a production designer had dipped from a project. I happened to have my computer and started doing SketchUp models of like, you could do the set like this, or, and knew my way around framing and construction and all these stuff. And somebody said, you want to be the production designer? I said, yeah, I don't know what that means. And kind of never looked back. And for, my start of my career, production design, I was like, that's going to be the thing. I want to make sets, and I want to design the world. And I want to go through all that. And then art directed Golden Delicious, which was kind of a big moment for me. I made the connections professionally that ended up getting me where I am. And then had to take a year off for immigration. So took that year off, worked for a company in event decor that did film rentals. So I knew of them and I had a connection with them and was able to work for them for a year, solidified my immigration, departed there, sent off some emails. And that was where the prop master from Golden Delicious, I had sent an email to him saying, hey, I'm returning to the industry. He'd offered me some work over the course of that year that I had to turn down. I said, hey, if you end up needing anything, give me a call. And it worked out perfectly that he needed somebody for a couple of days. So I did, I think 5 days in total, 3 as on-set props and 2 actually doing set construction for that show. Met the production designer, and then the production designer was moving going to a different company, and moving away from the company that they'd sort of been consistently working with. And the prop master didn't want to follow. So my name came up. I took the gig, didn't really know what the hell I was doing, and haven't looked back.
Cool.
Yeah, and that was a year and a half ago, 2 years ago now. It was a while ago.
Follow-up question. If you could go back or depart wisdom onto someone wanting to become a props master, what would you recommend them doing, knowing what you know now?
Knowing what I know now, I would say, I mean, there's a lot of roads to the top of the mountain, and I think there's advantages kind of to everything. If you, at the end of the day, the job, what they're really paying for, is not for you to know everything, not for you to have all the answers right now, but for your ability to figure it out. For your ability when you get that phone call from the production designer saying they really care about this blood draw. It needs to be it needs to look good. It needs to work. We need to see the vials filling up. You have to figure it out. I've never been a nurse. I don't know how that works. Me and my team did a bunch of research. We talked to the prop houses about what they had for options, and we figured something out. And that's ultimately the skill that you have to prioritize. It's not about knowing how to do everything. At the end of the day, too, it's not even really about being able to make all the things. Pretty early on, if there's something you can't make yourself, you're going to have the budget to hire a fabricator and pay somebody else to do it. And it'll make more sense to capitalize on those skills that somebody else has. So it does come down to nurture a spirit of figuring it out, of researching, having the answers, not today, but tomorrow. And being able to say, I don't have that answer right now. Give me 24 hours, nurture that in yourself and then just go and do it. I think, I understand the reasons for film school and I don't even necessarily think it's bad for everybody. But it is a path. It can be a path going to film school. And if you want to really reach high levels of film, I think it's probably beneficial. If you really are set on being a production designer, I think it's probably really beneficial to go to film school. You get to the things that you're taught and you learn there in those environments are probably beneficial for that level of filmmaking. But if you don't necessarily see yourself sitting behind a desk doing design drawings, 12 hours a day, 5 days a week, and you want to be a little bit more hands-on, you want to be more on the ground, doing the thing. Nurture a skill and an attitude of figuring it out, and then just go and do it. Go and do it. There's always indie stuff. It sucks to volunteer, and I'm a big believer in paying people for their work. But it's just the best way to learn. It's just to do it. And those people on those volunteer projects, I mean, again, we're doing a little volunteer project. We also work professionally. And so when you do those volunteer projects, you meet people who can say, oh, hey, actually, you know what? You killed it. You really helped me out. You did me this solid. I need a body, later. Or I know somebody to call, who needs a body. And that's how you're going to get there, I think.
No. Two very good answers. Yeah, there are multitudes of ways you can get to where you destined to be, but I agree. The one caveat of that is definitely being able to adapt in the moment as well as finding the answer when you're asked the question. Have you ever had a big scramble on the day, and how did you manage it?
Yeah, I mean, yes, yes, so many, so many. It's the one. Did a show. This coming to mind just immediately because we've also talked about mental health. It was a big mental health moment for me. I was doing that resort show, and they had a couple scenes that were in the breakfast kitchen kind of area, and they wanted a buffet spread. And the agreement that is pretty common, depending on the food spread or how things are looking in the show, but it's kind of common and I guess what you could call standard that the props department is responsible for the food and the set tech department is responsible for the table, the basin, the punch bowl, and then I would kind of go in after them and fill it all up. So myself and the set decorator had meetings. I talked to the assistant decorator and the buyers about what are we looking for, what do we need, how much space, how many dishes am I planning on making, all these things. And I had there was I had a menu during the show and tell that I had presented of okay, I'm not going to cook all this food necessarily for the show and tell because it's all just going to go in the garbage. But here's a menu with photos of this is what I'm going to prepare for this buffet spread. And it was approved. The director saw it, read it. The producer saw it, read it, loved it. Great. We get to the day. I've been working. Thankfully, the location was amazing, and they let us use their industrial kitchen. So myself, my assist was kind of managing set, and I was just going through and preparing all this food. Which, again, another growth moment is honestly for a show like that, I would now be just paying a food stylist.
Yeah.
I've learned like
I was like, wow, you went above and beyond.
Yeah. Well, and especially anyway, go on. So anyway, so I'm slaving away in the kitchen. It was very, lots of people poking jokes, poking on the crew, oh, Chef Stafford over there, working away, doing all this food. And what ended up happening, and to my own discredit here, to sort of give all credit where it's due, there was a line in the script that mentions lack of carbs in the scene. And that was, something I had kind of missed. I had kind of remembered in the back of my head, but had focused more on fulfilling what I had sort of promised. Yeah. And one of the things I put in there was avocado toast. And this was that moment where I had to, as I recovered from this experience, I had to remind myself, like, the director is dealing with a million other things. And there were other issues that I had no knowledge about that I found out after the fact. But he walked in the door and said, why the hell is there bread on this table? What is going on? This is not, it says specifically there's no carbs on this table. Why is there bread here? Yeah. And it became a moment of like, I got to figure something out, like right now. This has been something I've been planning for like a week. What can I cook? What can I make right now to fill this space? How can I do it? And again, to her credit, my assist is freaking amazing. And like together we just made it work, and it happened. We got there. It worked. But that whole day and all of the food styling, because unfortunately that then delayed me starting on the next scene's food. And the actress, the number one, was vegan, and it was scripted that she was eating a pancake. And funnily enough, pretty easily pancake mix that is gluten-free. Yeah. But it's all still requires milk. Yes. All still requires milk and eggs to make the pancake mix. The pancakes work. And you can get, again, we ended up using oat milk for the milk, but the eggs were the thing. I couldn't find a convenient substitute for the eggs that was still vegan. And so I had to figure out this perfect way to make these pancakes, and I was already behind. And so I'm literally between takes. They're shooting in the dining room, which is this open concept. So I'm frying pancakes between takes to slap on the plate to immediately go to set to get eaten. And I had to throw out the first half of them that I made because they looked more like crepes or tortillas. They weren't getting that fluffiness of pancakes. I finally got the perfect temperature and the perfect consistency of the batter and all this to make it still look like a pancake. But I was sitting there as the takes are happening, I'm frying these pancakes behind Video Village, sitting at the stove.
You watch it back and you're 30 seconds before I was sweating on those pancakes.
Yeah, it was intense. And we got there, and the producer of that, the EP of that show, was so thrilled about the food quality too. It was something she made a point of saying, it bothers her in Hallmark movies when the food quality is so clearly you just went to Olive Garden and bought pasta or whatever. And she was so appreciative, and it was a hard moment. It was a rough moment, especially in that time where the director's kind of coming down on me and my team about this thing that I felt justified, because I was I showed you the list of what I was going to make with pictures to say specifically. To his credit, I missed something in the script that was this little throwaway line that was actually really quite, okay, no carbs on the table. Yeah. And again, to the director's credit, there was so many other things happening that had nothing to do with me. But it was one of those what are we going to do? What are we going to do? I can't just tell them I don't have it. That's not an option at this point. The show must go on. We got to roll the camera. And we can't just have this big empty spot on the buffet where there's no avocado toast now.
I was going to say, can you not just throw it out and put no avocado toast?
out of avocado toast.
Shit, I wish they had avocado toast.
Yeah. I mean, that would have been, that would have been an interesting, I think if it came down to a moment of me being well, I can't, they might have.
That would have been plan F or something.
Yeah. I'm sure the director would have repositioned and changed the line from I'd kill for a carb to, oh man, they got to be out of, why is they're out of this? And it still would have had the same, comedic impact. But At the end of the day, that's not for me to decide, right? That's on the adults, as we call them, to make those kinds of creative decisions. My job is to fulfill their vision.
Yeah. No, but that's an awesome story of the scramble on the day. Literally like scrambling to make pancakes.
Yeah. It was interesting, but we got there. That's kind of the final takeaway. Is always like you always have to just you got to get there.
Show must go on. What's the saying? The sun waits for no man.
Yeah.
How do you deal with interdepartmental fighting?
Yeah. I've been lucky enough to not have it happen often, but there have been some times I've never had, I guess, what I would call like a fight where voices got raised or like big issues happened. I have had it occur. I mean, miscommunications happen, for a lot of reasons in a lot of ways and it's always comes down to both sides kind of, in my opinion, miscommunications are always a two-sided thing. Which is why so much of my energy and prep is dedicated to like clarity with the costumes department, clarity with special effects, clarity with set tech, and really early on building those connections of like what parts of this are you going to agree to handle and what parts am I going to agree to handle or volunteer to handle. Inevitably, though, miscommunications occur, and it comes down to you always have to maintain professionalism. Yeah. Even in the face of somebody, if the other person in the room is going to break that professionalism, start screaming, start yelling, it's up to you not to rise to their level. And it's so hard. But that's what you have to do. You have to maintain professionalism, and you will be respected for maintaining that professionalism under that pressure. So that's really the first step, is like never raise your voice, even if your voice is being raised at you. Like always maintain like you're a professional, you're a worker, and you have to have that confidence that like I know what I'm doing. I know the conversation that was had. If a miscommunication occurred and part of that responsibility falls on me, okay, but what is the solution? Be solution focused. What's the fix? Okay. As a great example, again, that show where I had my make or break moment, like there was a moment where I provided a sword that was rigged to like a trap. And I provided the sword and had thought that I'd communicated really effectively to the special effects department, hey, I'm going to give you the sword because they take it out of the trap and it's a prop for the rest of the film. But, I'm going to give it to you and I'm going to give you a stunt safe version and all that. And then like, you're going to rig it to this door trap. You're going to do the thing. And, I thought I'd communicated this multiple times, both to the special effects coordinator and to their crew. But on the day, it ended up being something that just got missed. The special effects coordinator wasn't aware that was something that needed to happen on that day at that time. And their team kind of was left in a bit of a scramble trying to fix this, trying to figure it out. And I got kind of, as I'm sitting in the truck trying to prep for things, the special effects coordinator came to me and said, so what's going on, man? Like, we agreed or we said this and again, to his credit, like there was no raised voices. It was a very professional conversation, but it was like, what's going on, right? Like, why is this happening? And in that moment, I was still pretty early in my career, and I think I could have potentially, like now I would handle things a little bit different about how I would have that conversation. But it just came down to, I said, from an intuitive and like professional perspective, my job is to handle the prop, and your job is to do the special effects rigging. I understand, I apologize for whatever miscommunication has occurred. I provided the prop. Your job is to rig it. And that's what this kind of comes down to. As hard as it is to like stand your ground in that moment, like I'm not qualified, and God forbid myself or my team does something that's going to hurt somebody. This is something that falls on you because you're qualified to do it. Yeah. And that was kind of where we walked away. It was a perfectly professional moment and conversation of this kind of, in his eyes, my refusing to do something that I had potentially agreed to do resulted in his team being under the microscope and being put in this really hard position. And it sucks when that happens. Like, totally empathize. You never want to be caught with your pants down, least of all because another department hasn't done something you thought they were going to do. Yeah. But it just came down to reacting, calmly, professionally. Look, this is what it comes down to. This is how it's going to be.
Sure. And that, like, I guess that keeps the ball rolling that much faster instead of like trying to hold this grudge against someone. And the last question to take us home here, and this one's interesting because I know you've dealt with it. Have you ever had a moment when you've given everything to your team and they take it for granted? What do you do in that scenario, if anything?
Yeah. I mean, I've been very lucky. The people that I have had work for me have all been, with rare exception, been really amazing, excellent people to work with me. There's always been really solid respect, foundations of respect and appreciation there. Obviously, there's the one example of when that didn't happen.
For sure.
And again, keeping everything as anonymous as possible. Like, I try in all things to be aware of, regardless of the decision to forgive somebody for something is an entirely separate issue in my mind from like understanding what their perspective and what they're dealing with is. I don't think in any situation somebody is really ever intentionally slighting another person. I've really, really rarely ever encountered somebody who wants intentionally to screw somebody over. It happens, and that's horrible when it does, but more often than not, you're dealing with somebody who's also under pressure, who's also dealing with things themselves, perhaps, mental health issues, or really any number of things. And in the particular sort of case that we are both familiar with, I think it came down to somebody got thrust into a position that they weren't prepared for, that they do in an indie space. And I am aware of the requirements at a higher level and what it looks like at a higher level and what the responsibilities and the expectations are at a higher level. And that person wasn't prepared for that. And that is ultimately on myself and the production team who put the name forward. I don't think that it necessarily is a discredit of their skill. My personal issues aside, like, I can totally understand how somebody can thrust into a position that like you were not ready for that. And someday you might be, today you're not, and then things spiraling out of control from there absolutely can create a really devastating situation. Also to speak of something a little bit less away, departing from this situation that has its external factors. The first show I ever prop mastered, I had a really tough moment where my on-set, facing some mental health issues, had to depart set, and did so. Really with little notice, didn't even tell me. I found out about it from a PA that he'd handed his walkie to. And it was a real scramble of like all of a sudden, I'm going from prep mode to I have to manage the set now. Called in an ASAP. It sort of worked out and we got there in the end. And it as hard as it was, especially being that I had just gotten this opportunity and I didn't want to mess it up. The best thing to do in those situations is to just focus on, as hard as it is for you, whatever empathy you can find, whatever little bits of like, hey, I get it. You're dealing with something like this. The film, at the end of the day, we're not saving lives, right? No. Like the priorities here should be your mental health and your personal safety. And it's so hard when you're in it. It's so hard. But the best thing always to do is just think about like, okay, what is the best thing for you, for the human beings in this situation? And it's never to yell. It's never to get mad. It's never to fight somebody. It's never to fire somebody in a huff. That's never the best thing for the people in the situation, including yourself.
No, I would agree. And actually, one thing that you mentioned there that I think should be known in the film industry, it's okay to say if you're not the right person for the job. Like and it's happened many a times, even in my career, when I'm like if a job's too much, it's okay to say that this is something you're not qualified for, or that like maybe at this moment right now, it's something that I want to do, but I'm not the right person for it, or I just don't have similar to, I don't have the answer for you, but I'll find out. There's also, it's okay that I don't have the qualifications to do this at this moment. And that's okay. It's almost better to, and I say this as like on the side of an AD, that it's better for you to tell me what the problem is than try to hide the problem, and then the problem becomes twice as big. The other thing that I'll mention, that I'm sure it's not just for props master, I think every industry has this at any level. You'll always think you're doing more than what your boss is doing.
Yeah.
I have a feeling it's with everything. You think they're getting paid more and doing less work, but also my thought process with that is they've earned that right. They've usually done the come up to get to that level and have done the hard yards to be able to do those things that they're doing.
Well, and I think until you're right, until you've done it yourself, like honestly, again, referencing this kind of experience that we had this last summer, it was a final nail in a coffin of an idea I had been really toying with, of like, even in an indie space, I've kind of agreed with myself, made it sort of an agreement that production design is really just no longer something I'm interested in. Prop mastering, construction coordinating, like these things that have a little bit lower burden of responsibility, I love to do and I enjoy. And that's not to say, again, that like prop mastering isn't a very intense job, or construction coordinating doesn't have its hardships and things, but you also have to kind of accept, and I think this is something, again, as these questions, if they're for people who are looking at getting into the industry, accept that you don't know what that job actually looks like. And unfortunately, the film industry, because it's the Wild West, there's no job description that exists that accurately encompasses what that job looks like until you work it, or until you're closely working with it. You won't really know what a production designer does.
Yeah.
And when I started, I thought it was, building sets and doing set dressing and very hands-on, and I loved it. And then I started to actually work professionally in the world, and I realized, well, no, actually production design is sitting in an office in meetings. It's very political. You're responsible for interacting with executives and convincing them to give you lots of money. You're doing drawings and getting swatches, and like it's much more high design. And really, unless things are going wrong, you should not be involved in actually touching anything. And so that shifted really for me what my perception of what my career trajectory was going to be. I don't want to sit at a desk. I don't want to be involved in high level politics of film. I like being able to say, I'm going to make a thing. And that realization I could only come to from having worked in the industry. There's no way to know the subtle differences in those roles or the hierarchy or whatever until you do it.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us here today, imposing on us your wisdom and your expertise as you've gone through the thick of it. If someone is listening to this and they want to hire the amazing Stafford on their next show, what do you want to plug? Plug it away. And then to follow, if there's a piece of work that you want to put at the end of this, what can we put?
Okay. Wow. Okay. Oh, I wasn't prepared for this. Yeah. If I want to, I guess if I'm selling myself, never run into a situation I couldn't figure my way out of. And every day I'm learning more and growing more. And I like to think of myself as a Swiss Army knife. There's a whole lot of things I've done to pay the bills, and a whole lot of things I'll continue to do to pay the bills. And weirdly enough, they all come in handy at some point. So if you want a prop master Swiss Army knife, give me a call.
And where did they go to find you? Email, Instagram?
I think
agent?
I gave you. No, I don't have an agent. Someday maybe, if there even exists prop master agents. But my Instagram is Audacity Design, which I think will be linked somewhere in this.
We'll put it on the blurb.
Great. That's probably the easiest way to find me. I don't post anywhere near enough of my work. There's a few things on there. And then email's a great way to get a hold of me. It's my first name, Stafford, at audacitydesign.com. It's the same as the Instagram handle. And there was one other thing. And I'm totally blanking on it.
What do you want to plug at the end of this? So I always like to put either a piece of work you're most proud of. It could be a photo of something you've created, or it could be maybe a demo reel. I don't know if prop masters have that.
I don't have a demo reel.
Might even be your resume, your IMDb.
Yeah, there you go. Well, I'm so bad at updating my IMDb. So people are going to look me up on there and be like, who the hell is this guy? What is he? No, I think about what's out, I guess. That's sort of the trouble. Hopefully a little movie called Spread comes out in this coming year.
I'm sure there's a trailer I can put for it.
I don't even think there's a trailer out, which is a real bummer. But Liz Gillies, Harvey Keitel, it's amazing. There is some an official article I can give you the link too.
Perfect.
But it's an amazing crew, super funny movie. I got the pleasure of seeing the cut with the production designer, and it's just an amazing movie, super fun. And hopefully the director and I are going to be working together again in the new year.
Awesome.
So that would be the thing, and then Golden Delicious as well, because I didn't prop master that, but it's an amazing movie, and it's out on somewhere. I think Apple TV.
It's out there in the ether.
Yeah, it exists.
Awesome. Well, once again, thank you so much for joining us here today. And that is a wrap on What's Your 20 with Stafford Mathews.
Yeah, just a second. Dad, what?
Hey! I'm on the way out, but I wanted to wish you luck today. It's your first game.
How'd you know for sure that you, wanted to go into culinary school?
Felt it in my bones.
What do your bones tell you? He likes being the coach's assistant.
He's only doing that so he can be on the court where he wants to be.
Sorry, I didn't see you there.
It's my bad. I'm Jake Wong. Hey, Alex, it's Chad.
It is just basketball.
Just basketball.
My boyfriend used to call me Sexy Lexi. Ex-boyfriend, I mean.
What about the restaurant? This is your family.